Good evening, listeners, and welcome to the Phantom Myth with myself, your host, Priscilla Phantom. First of all, I would like to apologise for the last episode. It seems that entire letter was a hoax after all. Apparently, a man named Lucas Winters had been reported missing by Oliver Farthing, but there is no record of a Lucas Winters ever living on this island. I believe Mr. Farthing may be playing a joke in poor taste, or he is suffering from some sort of delusion. Either way, I believe he is unwell. I have received many letters, and the one I am reading out on this episode of the Phantom Myth is from Alistair Sharp. You may very well recognise his name. As of February 2021, his name has been painted on all 4 ships importing to us, here on East Grave. Mr. Sharp has an unlikely story of bravery and heroism for you all. Dear Miss Phantom, look, I'm not rattled by this incident, and obviously, Miss Phantom, you're not going to believe me. But there are a lot of people on this island who do believe in monsters. I've gone back and forth on whether it's a good idea to release my story, but I figured there's no such thing as bad publicity, and I also think I'll protect your cargo with my life. Seems like quite a good slogan. So here it is. I run a small shipping business here on this island. A Sharp Shipping. I suppose with a name like that I should have opened a music shop. Sounds less stressful at least. But I feel at home when at sea, and I feel at sea when I'm at home. I have 4 ships, the Theseus, the Triton, the Orion, the Atlas. I started small with 1 little boat, and I kept my prices low as I could, and built my business from there. At the time, Eventide was the only other import business on this island. I got told time and time again that this island could not support 2 shipping companies long term. In the end, they were right. I bought out what was left of Eventide 2 years ago. Now, I guess this story began with one of clients who rang me about some cargo she wanted shipping over to the island from the mainland. I told her it would be transported on the Triton, and I would personally travel with it to ensure nothing happened to this highly discreet cargo. Look, I don't go out of my way to take deals that seem a bit dodgy, to say the least. But sometimes you have to make ends meet. Now, I don't know this client well, and honestly, that's how I want it to stay. Don't get me wrong, she couldn't be nicer to my face, but I get the feeling she wouldn't hesitate to glass me in a car park over a £5 and a packet of crisps. It doesn't go without saying I didn't want to be on her bad books. That's not the only reason I travelled with the cargo. But I did make sure my schedule aligned in such a way that I would be going back with the shipment. I was actually going to cross to the mainland to spend some time with my sister who had moved over there for work. She'd just had a little girl and I was eager to meet my niece. I'm not planning on having children, so this kid could very well be the heir to my business. The cargo was dropped off at the dock by a shady-looking man. Honestly, he couldn't have looked more conspicuous if he tried. Long tan trench coat and black slacks, with black sunglasses, well-polished loafers. It was like he took inspiration from every spy film ever made. One of my crewmen, named Ellis, suggested he must be up to date with April's edition of Dodgy Henchman fashion magazine. I smirked and nodded in agreement. My crew knew me as a man of few words and little sentiment, so he seemed happy at my approval. I greeted the man, who glanced around, wary that somebody might be watching. He didn't say a single word during the encounter. He simply wandered over to his van and opened up the back doors. There were 2 large crates, nailed down and wrapped in chains, fastened with a padlock. I didn't ask what was inside, and he didn't offer the information. I called over 3 of my men to help me carry them to the ship. They were lighter than I imagined, but large and cumbersome. It hurt my pride to admit it, but I couldn't have carried it on my own. I could have easily pushed them, but my client seemed quite insistent that we treat them with care. We took them inside, using an old lever and pulley to store the crates below deck, and secured them to the floor with belts. Usually we would leave them out, but the client was insistent that they needed to be protected, and she didn't want them exposed to the elements. I then traipsed back out to the conspicuous man, who handed me a roll of notes. "Half now and half later?" I asked, counting the money. He nodded and smiled. It was not a nice smile, but it wasn't cruel either. It was a knowing smile, as if he understood a joke that nobody else did. I stood there and watched as he got into the van and drove away, with this empty feeling in the pit of my stomach. I wanted to chase after him and demand that he take the crates back, but it was done now. I boarded the boat once again, and we set sail. For a while, everything seemed normal. Everyone was in unusually high spirits and seemed to be getting along with their jobs. I sent one of my crew, a young man named Benjamin Rynham, down to sit with the cargo. It seemed like an easy job, and the boy's been through a lot recently. His granddad died and his uncle has gone missing. Apparently his grandmother was inconsolable. Poor boy has been helping his mum keep the family together. And the rest of the crew have been trying to distract the boy with jokes or work, but he just got this distant look in his eyes. He'd been there for a while. I thought I might give him a job that gave him some time to process his grief. It was a nice idea, but after an hour or so, a knock came at my office door. I shouted to tell them to come in without looking up from my paperwork. The door swung open and I heard a soft voice that I knew to be Benny. "Mr. Sharp, there's something wrong with the crate." I asked him if it was damaged. He said no. I asked him if it had been dislodged from the belts securing it. He said no. "Then what is it?" I asked. I remember exactly what he said, just because it was such an odd thing to say. He turned to me, worried lines prematurely etched into his face. "It's singing, Mr. Sharp." "What do you mean it's singing?" I snapped at the boy, more harshly than I should have. He motioned for me to follow him. I sighed and got up and strode through the door past Benny and made my way down below deck to the room where the crate was. By the time I got to the doorway, I could hear it too. An eerie, delicate voice murmuring in a language that I didn't recognise, but somehow it felt familiar, as if I'd been hearing this song my entire life, but I was only now realising it. I placed a hand on the crate that the noise was coming from, and the ship swayed to port side, knocking me back. I stepped away and the ship steadied. "What's inside?" Benny asked me. "You don't need to know," I told him. But the truth was, I had no idea. It could be anything. But whatever it was, it couldn't be alive, could it? I sent Benny to go scrub the deck, and once he was out of the room, I crouched down before the crate and knocked gently on the wood. It didn't stop singing. "Hello," I called into the box, feeling foolish, and the song continued, unhindered. There was nothing else I could think to do. Short of taking a bolt cutter to the chains wrapped around the crate and a crowbar to the crate itself. My client had been quite insistent that the cargo was to be treated with the utmost care, so opening the crate would be a last resort. And, although the singing was odd, it didn't appear to be a hazard of any kind, so I left it. That was a mistake. I should have, at the very least, had somebody watching. But it was a strange situation. It just seemed ridiculous. I went back up to my office and closed the door, poured myself a glass of brandy and continued with my paperwork. After an hour or so, I realised I could hear something. I mean, I could always hear something. But there were footsteps, the men chattering, and the boat often creaked. The Triton was the oldest of the 4 ships, but I loved her. She was still perfectly capable of getting the job done. But the wood creaked as we were buffeted by the wind and thrown by the waves. This noise I heard was different, however. It was the crate. It must have gotten louder, much louder, judging by the fact that I could hear it all the way up in my office with the door closed. I got up from the desk, unsure of myself for a moment. Maybe I should have opened the box and made whatever was inside stop. Maybe I should never have taken this job to begin with. Maybe. My thoughts were cut off by a scream, shrill and uncomfortable to the ears. I ran out of my office and to the deck. I don't think I knew what to expect, but whatever that was, wasn't it. The sun was setting, and my eyes hadn't adjusted to the light, but silhouetted against the sky was a tendril of some sort, but it was much larger than that of any sea creature around here should be, and these were fairly shallow waters after all. It went straight for Benny, wrapping around his ankle and pulling his foot out from under him. He shrieked as he fell to the floor. The ship rocked to the side and I stumbled as I ran towards Benny, who was now being dragged up into the air. I reached him just in time to grab one of his arms and I tried to pull him back down, but that thing, whatever it was, did not let go. I don't think I even realised it had dragged me off the ground until I felt Lydia, another one of my crew, grab hold of my leg. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, and Ellis was running down the other side of the boat, close to where the tendril arched up out of the water below. I shouted for him to stop, or to be careful. I'm not even sure if I actually said words at that point, or whether it was just a wordless yell. He raised something high in the air, and for a moment amid the chaos, I saw so clearly. The sunlight glinted off the blade. In his hands was a hatchet. He swung, and a terrible wail reverberated around the deck, and we all fell to the floor. I scrambled to my feet and glanced over to Ellis, who still held the hatchet, covered in dark blood, that shone blue in the light. He was still breathing heavily. "Everybody, below deck," I yelled to my crew. But as I did so, I heard a yelp, and when we looked back over at Ellis, he was gone. Only the blooded hatchet laid on the floor where he had been standing just a moment ago. "We have to help him," Lydia cried, running over to the side of the boat, and she peered into the water. "He's gone." "There's nothing we can do for him now. Get below deck," I shouted. There was no argument. I think we all blamed ourselves for leaving him. But what could we have done? The hard truth is that if we had tried to rescue him, we would all be dead too. I know we never would have saved him, but it does nothing to ease my conscience or chase away the nightmares. Down, below deck, we could hear the hollow booming of something hitting the side of the ship. We could feel the ship rocking and swaying as it was battered by the creature. But above all, we could hear that terrible, horrible singing. I had never noticed how sharp and raspy the voice sounded as it carried that tuneless tune. I picked up the bolt cutters that somebody had left on one of the nearby crates, and I turned to Benjamin. "Go find me a crowbar." He nodded and ran to go look as I made my way over to the crate. The closer I got, the more it sounded as if whatever was singing was just screeching the words, assuming of course that they were words of any sort. The crew gathered around the crate as I broke open the chains. Upon hearing the snap of the iron links break, the voice in the box began to scream. It was not a sound of fear, but out of anger. The ship swayed violently to one side, and a horrible roar rang out. I stumbled, and a few of my crew fell to the floor, but I managed to stay upright. I heard Benjamin shout out, "I have the crowbar, Mr. Sharp." He tumbled towards me as the ship rocked from side to side, as if we were caught in the midst of a storm. But the noise, the sound that creature made, were unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It roared, it screeched as it lashed out at the ship. I grabbed the crowbar from Benjamin and I jammed it underneath the lid of the crate and I pushed it down, levering the lid up. The music stopped. The monster's screeching died and the ship steadied. Of all the things I expected to find in the crate, from a tape player to a contortionist, what I actually did find was right at the bottom of the list. There was a stone, a large grey stone, smeared with copper and with a symbol carved into it. I'm not sure how to describe the symbol. A simplified flower shape, built of dead things. It was beautiful. There was no denying that the symbol was beautiful, but it looked ancient and knowing. That must sound ridiculous. How can a stone be knowing? But it held something. I was sure of it, and I want nothing to do with it. This thing or the people who wanted it shipped over. Nothing. The stone was laying on top of a mound of carefully folded fabric. I could see something stick out from underneath the stone, a pattern on the fabric. I thought about lifting up the stone so I could see the pattern, but something about it made me think I shouldn't touch. I'm not superstitious and I don't believe in curses and monsters, but some strange things happened during that voyage, and honestly, I couldn't rule out that the client hadn't booby-trapped the box or covered the stone in acid or something. So instead of directly moving the stone, I picked a corner of the fabric and tugged it until I could see the pattern. It was a dagger. The shape of a dagger had been carefully embroidered into the fabric. I don't know what to make of it. It was strange at the very least. I sat with the crate myself the rest of the trip back, and I was careful to nail it back down in such a way that it looked like it had never been opened. When we arrived, I received a phone call from a withheld number. I answered it in my usual manner, but whoever was on the other end cut off immediately. We moved both crates into our warehouse and I locked a new chain around the one we had opened. Nobody has come to collect them, and I haven't been able to contact the client who ordered them to ship. It makes me wonder what's in the second box. This is an interesting story for a number of reasons. While it does seem completely unbelievable, Alistair Sharp does have an entire crew backing up his story. It is highly possible that he made this to explain the damaged crate and the missing crewmen, and I guess either threatened or paid off his crew to verify his lies. However, if that is the case, he is very committed to this ridiculous story of krakens and sea monsters. Why on earth would he opt for this tale rather than something more likely? I believe he is currently being investigated by the police for this, but I have no doubt that no judge would convict him. I believe his true vocation lies in a peddler of secrets. I have met him on a couple of occasions. Let me tell you, I trust him as far as I can throw him. I do not believe this story, but I am not the judge of his trial, so I feel it would hardly matter. Listeners, our streets have recently become much safer, but something strange does seem to be happening on this lonely island. Stay safe and sleep well, dear listeners.
The voice of Priscilla Phantom was Lyndsey Evans. This episode was written, edited and produced by Sasha K Williams. Thank you for listening to The Phantom Myth. Hope you enjoyed it. Well, don't die before the next episode. Share this with your friends. Thank you.